Why do men commit all of the crimes? This is a complex topic with few strongly established answers, as far as I am concerned. Interest in female offending, more often with respect to the gender gap in offending, has increased substantially over the past few decades, but there are still many unknowns. Before continuing, I invite reading sociologist Kruchnet, 2013, summary of what research on gender and crime has found. Click here. Gender and gender differences, socialization, criminalization, etc. Broadly speaking, two popular lines of research concern gendered socialization and differential treatment according to gender. For illustration, I quote criminologist Rosemary Gartner, 2011. If the sexes are more alike than different in the nature of their criminal behavior and the factors associated with it, why are they so different in the levels of their offending? One important reason is sex differences in socialization practices and family supervision that encourage conventional behavior among girls and risk-taking behavior among boys. Hagen, 1988. Girls are less likely to engage in delinquent acts because they are socialized to fear risky behaviors, to develop empathy for others, to value close personal and family relationships, and to avoid aggression, and because they are likely to spend more time with family members and other girls who reinforce conventional behavior. In contrast, boys are typically encouraged to value risk-taking, to associate masculinity with physical power and control, and to prize autonomy and independence, and they are likely to spend their time with male peers who reinforce these characteristics. Delinquent activities for boys then tend to be more rewarding and more affirming of their identities. These tendencies are reinforced as boys and girls move into adolescence and early adulthood, when women's criminal opportunities are more limited than men's, and women's family responsibilities make the costs of crime greater for them. Steffenschmeier and Allen, 1996. The second line of research is concerned with the differences in how men and women are perceived, conceptualized, and treated by society and its institutions. For instance, for crime to happen, you need opportunity, e.g. C. Clark, 2012. Men and women tend not to share the same roles, statuses, lifestyles and routine activities, therefore there are differences not only in socialization but also in crime opportunities, e.g. see historical trends below. There is also the matter of how society reacts/responds to men and women's behaviors, e.g. with respect to the criminal justice system, see the chivalry hypothesis, the concept of judicial paternalism, and the evil woman hypothesis. How the gap varies through time and space. For a recent illustration of how the socio-political context matters, see Savolainen et al., 2017. Analyzing data collected by the ISRD2, the WVS, and the GII, find that the gender gap in delinquency varies according to differences in national environments. The results of our analyses offer qualified evidence that the degree of patriarchy in a society is in fact related to the gender gap in delinquency. The results from a series of multilevel regression models showed consistent support for the hypothesis that patriarchal national environment moderates the association between gender and delinquent offending. The average male effect on delinquency was observed to be the largest among nations that adhere to more patriarchal gender norms and where the position of women in the social structure is the most disadvantaged. This finding was robust in analyses aimed at examining the hypothesized interaction effect across four measures of both delinquency and patriarchy. In other words, we found a statistically significant and positive cross-level interaction effect in each of the 16 models estimated. Also see historical research on crime which shows that the gender gap under discussion is not invariant across time. Here is the first paragraph of social historian of crime van der Heiden's review of Women and Crime, 1750 to 2000, 2016. It is generally observed by criminologists that women are responsible for a smaller proportion of indictable offenses than men, approximately 13% of all prosecution in Europe, AB et al. 2010, page 195. This strong gender difference in criminal behavior is generally linked to the dissimilar public lifestyles of men and women. The fact that women have less freedom and fewer opportunities may cause a lower participation by women in crime and may also lead to more lenient treatment by prosecutors. Polak, 1950, Adler, 1975, Arnott and Usborne, 2003, Burke, 2006, Silvestri and Crotherdowi, 2008, page 27. Furthermore, scholars generally assume that the sex differences in recorded crime have been consistent across time, stressing the continuity rather than change in men's excessive contribution to criminality. Heidenson, 1996, Burkhead, 2006, page 50, Silvestri and Crotherdowi, 2008, pages 26, 191. However, historical data on early modern Europe show that in France, England, and the Netherlands, between 1600 and 1800 women played a much more prominent role in crime than they did in the 20th century. Farge 1974, Feely 1991, Feely 1994, King 2006, Spierenberg 2008, page 117, van der Heyden 2013, van der Heyden 2014. And here is part of the conclusion. Sociologist Stefan Schmeier and behavioral scientist Allen argue that scholars should distinguish between the types of offenses committed by women and the explanation for their crimes. They agree that there is variability across time in the female percentage of offending, though such changes are limited mainly to minor property offenses or less serious forms of delinquency. Stefan Schmeier and Allen 1996, page 482. Throughout the period 1600 to 2000, women were most likely to be prosecuted for simple thefts, rather than offenses involving serious violence. Cruz and Jackson 2009, page 31. Statistical data on various regions in Europe in the early modern period show that variation in female crime rates was often linked to specific circumstances such as changing moral norms and double standards of prosecutors, as well as to economic marginality and opportunities that were related to migration, family structures, and labor participation. The data also clearly show that women were more likely to commit crimes in urban environments than in rural areas. Along the same lines, here is the perspective of social historian of crime Greg Smith, 2014. The greater representation of males among the ranks of criminal offenders is indisputable. The gender gap has been particularly pronounced for serious violent crimes, but it appears to have decreased somewhat over time because of relatively greater reductions in male violence over the centuries. For other types of crimes, males also generally predominate. However, historians have been at least as interested in instances where this sex difference is trivial or non-existent because of what it tells us about variations in the roles, status, and activity patterns of men and women. In times and places where food and shelter were difficult to come by for some, women showed themselves as willing and able as men to do what was necessary, except perhaps to kill or seriously injure, to survive. What these general patterns and trends obscure are the occasional departures from them in some times and places or for some types of crime. Historians have revealed a number of these deviations, but more evidence about them could enlighten our understanding of sex differences and similarities in crime. Furthermore, greater documentation of the extent to which officially recorded crime exaggerates or understates one or the other sex's illegal behavior would shed more light not only on the gendered nature of crime but also on the gendered nature of responses to it. For example, what we know about women's violence against men, Cook 2009, or their involvement in financial or white-collar crime, crimes for which women were rarely convicted, POC 2006, could be greatly enriched by looking at sources closer to the actual behaviors. As noted above, scholars have observed convergences in more recent years. Lauritsen et al. 2009 and Renneson 2009 have found a narrowing of the gap in violent offending in the US, and Estrada et al. 2016-2017 also find a similar pattern in Sweden. These trends seem to be driven by male offending decreasing more than decreases in female offending, i.e. changes in men's behavior more than women's behavior. Beaton et al. 2019 analyzed both violent and property crimes and find a narrowing of the gender gap in offending among young people in Queensland, Australia. For some of the more popular explanations for these patterns, see Lauritsen et al.'s discussion of their results. Click here. Although further research is needed, it is clear that the socio-historical context matters in shaping the extent to which men and women differ with respect to crime. Biological sex differences. A third popular line of research is that concerned with biological explanations, which are not necessarily mutually exclusive with the above. For illustration, Gartner provides the following. Biological sex is key to developmental approaches that focus on differences between males and females in neurocognitive functioning and deficits, Moffat et al. 2001. Males are more likely than females to experience poor impulse control, hyperactivity, and difficult temperaments. Females tend to acquire social information processing skills earlier in life, which allow them to develop empathy and anticipate the consequences of their actions, Bennett, Farrington, and Hughesman 2005. As a consequence of these differences, boys are more vulnerable than girls to stressful life events and to risk factors, particularly delinquent peers and poor parental supervision. And to quote Portnoy et al. 2014. Though males and females appear to share many of the same biological risk factors for antisocial behavior, males may be exposed to higher levels of these risk factors, thus contributing to their higher levels of antisocial behavior. Rowe, Vazzoni, and Flannery 1995, Moffat et al. 2001. This review identifies several promising biological candidates that could underlie the sex difference in criminal and antisocial behavior, based on their observed correlation with antisocial behavior and coupled with their higher frequency in males. These include lower resting heart rate, higher prenatal and circulating testosterone, and differential reactivity to stress. However, most of these conditions have not been rigorously evaluated. On the other hand, one of the few studies that rigorously examined biology as a mediator of the sex-crime relationship finds the observed sex difference in antisocial behavior disappears once controls are added for sex differences in orbitofrontal and middle gray frontal brain volume. Rain et al. 2011. This finding lends promising support to the possibility that biological functioning could play an important role in explaining sex differences in antisocial behavior. I will focus on testosterone because 1. Research on T has attracted a lot of interest, and it is a highly popular answer for why men are more aggressive and therefore more involved in crime, especially of the violent sort, and 2. The popular understanding of testosterone has not updated accordingly with recent developments and tends to be too simplistic. To quote biological anthropologist Agustin Fuentes' 2011 review of the relationship between testosterone and aggression. Overall, testosterone seems to be associated with the efficiency and activity of a variety of muscular and other physical systems, some of which are implicated in the expression of aggression. But contrary to popular misconceptions, testosterone itself is not associated in any causal way with increased aggressive behavior or in the patterns of the exhibition of aggression. As corroborated by a recent meta-analysis by Geniol et al. 2019. Results from exogenous testosterone administration work did not provide compelling evidence for a causal role of testosterone in promoting aggression. However, the latter findings are limited by the substantial heterogeneity in methods used in testosterone manipulation studies. An important take-home message from this meta-analysis is that relationships between testosterone and human aggression are relatively weak, and thus, more well-powered studies will be needed to provide sufficient statistical power to detect such small effects. In addition, more research will be needed that examines contextual and psychological moderators of the relationship between testosterone and aggression. Correlational and experimental research has yielded some evidence for moderator effects, e.g., trait dominance, impulsivity, self-construal. See Slatcher et al. 2011, Kerr et al. 2009, Kerr et al. 2017, Welker et al. 2017, Geniol et al. 2019. Such effects need to be independently replicated using large sample sizes to further our understanding of the degree to which such factors play a role in determining the people for whom and circumstances under which testosterone ultimately modulates human aggressive behavior. In short, per Gutman et al. 2021. Except in extreme cases, testosterone does not correlate causally with male aggression. In fact, one cannot generally predict anything about men's aggressive or non-aggressive behavior from their basal testosterone levels. Sapolsky 1997:151, 152. But it seems that many perfectly well-informed people, including some scientists, refer to testosterone as being more directly and causally correlated with aggression and violence, that testosterone is the cause of this pervasive aspect of masculinity, usually forgetting that testosterone is a species-wide phenomenon. This wishful thinking that we can rather easily explain an important aspect of human male behavior through biology and chemistry has led to the widespread and largely unchallenged exploitation of the male hormone, despite women also having this hormone, albeit usually in lower levels. Summation. I would keep in mind that there are ongoing debates on the causes of sex/gender differences in behavior more broadly, which has its fair share of controversies and butting heads. To quote Fine et al., figuring out how and to what extent is complicated, as illustrated by research on testosterone. Biological explanations of differences in behavior between women and men or girls and boys are everywhere, from scientific articles to best-selling self-help books to parenting guides to diversity and inclusion workshops to Hollywood movies. Often, the basic structure of such explanations is along the following lines. A study reports a difference between females and males in some neural measure, such as the size of a specific brain structure. The difference is often described as if it were binary, females are like this and males are like that, and a natural and inevitable consequence of being female or male, assumed implicitly or otherwise to be inscribed in our genes. Then, the biological difference is suggested to underlie a behavioral or psychological difference between females and males. This pattern of description and explanation can give rise to an aha feeling. Now we finally understand why women and men are the way they are. But researching, understanding, and interpreting sex differences in brain and behavior is surprisingly complicated, and particularly so when humans are involved. And to quote Gutman et al. Again, in humans' imagination, perceptions, and ideology matter as much as bone, muscle, and chromosomes. Both perceptual and material feedback loops channel violence into physiological changes in bodies and reshape ideologies and lived experiences. Both outside and inside the academy, there is widespread confidence in biological explanations for violence, especially an endemic violence perpetrated by males. Such confidence is both too simplistic and often badly misplaced. Biology matters but is never outside of the complex whole that constitutes human experiences. These experiences are situated in particular historical, political, economic, linguistic, and other social contexts, and they are constantly and actively entangled in shaping one another. I conclude with the following remark by Kevin Mitchell. If the origins of these differences remain unclear, so too do their consequences. And yet arguing about the kinds of effects that these small average differences in psychological traits have on patterns of real-world behavior and societal outcomes are the real flashpoints in this debate. Are women suited to careers in STEM areas or not? Is the pay gap due to differences in traits such as agreeableness? Generally speaking, correlations between personality traits and a variety of consequential social outcomes, happiness, educational attainment, job performance, health, longevity, are weak, and the predictive power for individuals is very low. And that's when we look at the full range of trait values across the whole population. But the sex differences discussed here are tiny relative to that range, meaning that any predictive value for outcomes will be correspondingly reduced. Given how little we know about how all these factors interact, it seems wildly premature and more than a little arrogant to assert that the small differences observed on lab-based measures of psychological traits are a sufficient explanation of observed differences in societal outcomes. We don't have a get-out-of-evolution-free card, but we are also not meat robots whose behavior is determined by the positions of a few knobs and switches, independent of any societal forces. One thing is clear, we'll never get to grips with the complexity of the interactive mechanisms in play if the debate remains polarized. We need a synthesis of findings and perspectives from genetics, neuroscience, psychology, and sociology, not a war between them. There are many past threads on sex/gender differences. I list some here. P.S. I would be wary of overgeneralizing, because much behavioral science research is weird. I cannot fit my ref. List here, so see below again for the list.